Good news, John. It's Friday, and we're still alive. So that ain't
Indeed.
bad. How are you today?
Doing great. I mean, if you know what we know, every day that you wake up is another miracle. So,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Another week. It's Friday, March 10th as we're recording this. And I guess over this coming weekend, there's daylight savings time, right? So
Is
next
that
week.
right?
Yeah,
Weren't they voting to get rid of that?
Yeah, they're talking about making it permanent so that the daylight savings time setting becomes the permanent setting, not the other way around. So we'll see what happens there.
Qualify as making it permanent or permanently getting rid of it? That's a bit of a philosophical question for us to explore in another episode. But John, I think most people who watch know we're doing our sponsor exclusive shows on Friday night. People can watch that on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and there's an array of Crowdsource the Truth branded sponsor exclusive places that people can go to, including subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, and now on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com. Somebody was having some technical problems with Odyssey the other day and decided it would be a good idea to go all over YouTube telling people that Odyssey is a ripoff and Jason is doing something and this and that. If you are having any kind of technical problem, please email me on truth@crowdsourcethetruth.org, and I will do my very best to help you resolve it. But John, when people go and publicly post that I'm ripping them off, it makes me very upset. And sometimes there are problems with some of these services, but if it's only one person who's describing the problem, it's probable that the problem is on their end. And how upset would a person be who really values the show and the work that we do and the guests that we bring on to know that they're publicly posting something that damages me or the other co-hosts or the guests? So please, if anybody has any technical problems, just email me and I'll help resolve them. But we've got so much to talk about today. The first thing on everybody's mind, including mine, is sort of what the hell is going on in the thumbnail. You appear prepared for what I've described as a pajama jammy jam. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Indeed, I do. It's a pajama party. And the reason it's a pajama party is it's like bedtime stories, except it's live.
Well, that's kind of it, but there's a bit more to it. The pajama jammy jam aspect, that you're familiar with Kid and Play, right? That's your favorite
of course
90s.
I have all their albums. I have all the albums.
Duo. Yeah. We can say I'm a huge Kid and Play fan, but they did have a funny movie.
Wake up, get out of my room. Yo, without even hearing my plan. A house party. House party? The mother of house parties, man. A pajama jammy jam.
There it is. Kid and Play with the pajama jammy jam. And, you remember that Robin, what's-his-name, didn't care if Marvin Gaye was at the party. But we got a whole different kind of party. Hillary Clinton is delivering your mail. What is going on in this thumbnail, John?
Well, today is the 3-year anniversary of Donald Trump declaring a national emergency in all 50 states. And so there's a very important piece of evidence that we're going to get to in a minute that we're going to dig into with our patrons. So when we go to this patron-only portion of the show, which we do out of necessity, right? We do it for two reasons. One is that's how we make a living, because we identify as journalists.
And so-called journalists.
We identify as so-called journalists. And the second reason is because the content that we share with our audience tends to be just a bit too hot for the YouTube platform. So we're very grateful to YouTube for letting us host the stuff that we do. But the truth is that the real deep content that we get into makes them very uncomfortable. So the best place for us to do it is in a private setting. And that's how Jason and I make a living. So we're very grateful to the people who support our work over there, because I don't make anything from YouTube. I don't think you do either. I'm not monetized at all. I haven't gotten $1 from Google. So everything that we do here is, not monetized. So the only support that we get is from our patrons, and we're very grateful for that. So
There's
in
one other
tonight's
component to it, John. Sorry to interrupt you, but
what's
one
that?
other important component that I want to share with people. The social engineers that I've been speaking about for 6 years, that people have seen in action trying to destroy, crowdsource the truth and access to social media, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, whatever, that crew has a series of things that they can do that were designed over many years to target those platforms, Twitter, YouTube, things like that. And by putting this stuff on Subscribestar, on Patreon, on Substack, on Odyssey, these platforms are controlled by different companies that perhaps haven't been infiltrated by these social engineers. And so we're allowed to proceed on these platforms because they haven't been rigged up to be destroyed. And you know, a lot of people saw me in Washington, D.C. yesterday making funny faces at the dopey Democrats who were just brazenly insulting Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, both Democrat voters. But I respect those guys tremendously. I've just hours ago written a new article called The So-Called Delegate. That's on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com that people can check out. But sorry, John, you were telling us about.
I just tweeted that out because I learned something. I didn't know that we had a representative from the Virgin Islands in Congress, but she doesn't get to vote on certain things. She's like a semi-delegate or something.
She's a delegate.
She's a delegate, but she sits in these committees, yet she doesn't get to vote. It's a very interesting thing because it's not the same as Guam, right? It's not the same.
No.
It's a strange. Again, it's something I didn't know anything about this before, but I do know that she was somehow connected to the Virgin Islands. So she's a representative from St. Lucia.
But she's from
St.
Brooklyn.
Croix.
She's not even from the Virgin Islands. She's a carpetbagger.
Well, if you're
my estimation.
if you're from Brooklyn and you can get a job as the delegate from the Virgin Islands, she may be the smartest woman from Brooklyn. I mean, that's the job. That's the job you want. Is like, all right, I'll be down in St. Croix, you know, and I got this, right? It's a smart woman. But the things that she was saying in that thing, I mean, man, she was out of line. I'm surprised Jim Jordan didn't bang the thing.
Yeah.
Congrats to you for being there. Congrats to you for being on camera. Interesting that they cut to you when they started talking about threesomes, but I think let's get to the deck. Let's get to let's get to the. I don't want to get too deep in that. All right, so let's show everybody what we've got for the show tonight. So first of all, again, thank you to everybody on Twitter who's been following me. I gained over 600 followers in the last week.
That's great.
Yeah, so numbers are shooting up again. So getting close to 10,000 followers. So that feels good. Last week, our patrons got to spend some time with us digging into these ash conformity experiments and looking at why they're so important and what do they indicate and how have we just experienced the same sort of thing as we saw in the ash conformity experiments and the Milgram experiments, the white coat experiment, and how that led to, on the next slide, this spiral of silence, right? And so we looked into all this, and this is fascinating psychology stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that we share with our patrons. And so that's what we were digging into last week to get a better understanding of the fear of isolation. In other words, Jason and I share some of the most cutting edge, newsworthy type information and evidence on the planet over the course of the last 5 years. And people who see that evidence are often afraid to share it. They're afraid to share it with their friends or family for the reasons that we studied last week with our patrons. So that's the kind of deep research that we get into, and you know, it's just a little bit too much, I think, for this this platform. So again, very grateful for YouTube for helping us kind of set it up and explain to people here. But when we go deep, we've got a place where we can do it safely.
Let me add something to that, John, because the other issue is a lot of people who maybe somebody's watching right now who's never seen us before, and they're like, who is this guy in a hat and glasses saying all this stuff? Of course, anybody's going to say they have cutting edge material and blah, blah, blah. Oh, did I screw up something with your... No, it's live. There we go. The thing I was going to say is, We know it's not just bluster, John, because in addition to people going to YouTube and subscribing to the John E. Hoover channel, we know it's not bluster because typically something in the range of 1 to 3 years after we talk about something and get kicked off of whatever particular platform for that something being accused of being, disinformation or a conspiracy theory or something like that, it starts to become mainstream, common knowledge. And so we don't get reinstated on these platforms, but people know if you were watching 3 years ago, you would have known about this stuff already.
And, I say it tongue in cheek. I joke when I say that, we're from the future. That's like a hashtag that I use in Twitter. I don't really mean that. Right. So I'm not like the people who think that they time travel. Like, I don't really believe that. I say
what's that guy's
joke.
name?
I don't know. Austin Steinbart or whatever. So I don't believe that I'm a time traveler. I say it as a joke because in South Park, there's these episodes where these guys from the future come back to now and they're willing to work for very, very little. And it's hysterical, and they end up having all kinds of slanderous names or whatever. And I think it's just the funniest stuff I've ever seen. So the joke is that we're from the future, and the reason is because we do cover things about a year or 2 or 3 before they usually hit the mainstream media. And so now we're watching the story unfold that we basically were reporting on 3 years ago. And the key element for tonight's show, and the reason that this is a slumber party, is these bedtime stories that I've been doing over on the Johnny Hoover channel are very popular. People seem to enjoy them for whatever reason, despite the fact that I'm reading remarkably boring material, right? So, and you can tell which ones are the bedtime stories because the thumbnails tend to have like a blue hue to them. So if you click on videos or something, you'll see all the ones with the blue hued thumbnails tend to be the bedtime stories.
People can get all of them at the John E. Hoover YouTube channel. This is totally free, so people should subscribe.
Yeah. If you're not a subscriber to it, again,
here we go.
I don't get $1. Yeah, I don't get any money if you subscribe. So there's a whole bunch of bedtime stories. People seem to like them. And tonight, what we're going to do with the patrons is sort of like bedtime stories, but it's going to be live. And so that's why rather than a bedtime story, I'm calling it a pajama party. So settle in, right? Get your hot toddy or whatever it is. And we're going to be reading tonight one of the pivotal pieces of journalism. And like we've seen before, there can be a piece of reporting that is so pivotal in a story that it is the watershed piece. And this article from Newsweek that was published really is the watershed piece. And we're going to be reading this tonight with our patrons when we go to the patron-only portion of the show. And the story is called Exclusive: Inside the Military's Top Secret Plans If Coronavirus Cripples the Government. And it's a story that was written by William Arkin, and it was published March 18th, I believe, of 2020. And today is the 3-year anniversary of the declaration of this national emergency in all 50 states. So that's why we're going to take a much closer look at this article and see what happened there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, as you were saying, it's consistent. The whole, my parents will call me and be like, oh, Tucker Carlson said X, Y, and Z. This is outrageous and blah, blah, blah. Like, why aren't you more, up in arms about this? Like, I've known this for years.
Exactly. So one of the big things that we're going to be taking a look at is, well, when he declares this national emergency in all 50 states, what was happening with COVID? And then if you roll forward just a couple days after he declares this national emergency, Hillary is saying, well, we need to vote by mail, and we need to make vote by mail kind of the way we do everything. There's not 200 people dead in the country. Dude, maybe she's jumping the gun just a smidge. Maybe.
I had forgotten that detail. This is good to review.
Let's take a look at the story. Zoom in on that for the audience. Show them what's the headline on this. This is
Coronavirus. Hillary Clinton calls to make voting by mail the norm in 2020. And then you've included a chart here that points out that on March 18th, so you're saying in all of the United States of America, only 191 people had died of coronavirus, but yet they had the confidence that it was definitely going to be a huge pandemic to the extent that nobody was going to leave their house, and we had to do the voting
in
by mail.
November. In November, right? So this is March. So March 18th, she's saying, come November, 8 months from now, we better vote by mail because we don't yet have 200 people dead. Does that make sense?
Doesn't make much sense to me, but I mean, again, this is one of these examples where I haven't spoken about this in a while, but I really don't like this word proof. Not that I don't like it, but it's super inaccurate. There's another piece of evidence that somebody knew something about this that they weren't telling us.
It's the only word I use as evidence. I don't, proof. To me, proof is a word we used in mathematics.
Right.
It's like when you were doing calculus or something, you would present a proof to show, here's what the curve looked like or whatever. To me, that's what a proof is. In our world, all we do is collect evidence. And when we have an overwhelming amount of evidence, might that constitute proof in the eyes of a jury? That's a different topic.
Right.
But nothing that I have ever constitutes proof of anything. It's just evidence. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. So what you're looking at now is one of my favorite photographs. And this is part of a lockdown series, I think, from Reuters. And this is a ballerina dancing in the middle of Broadway wearing a face mask to protect her.
That's crazy. It's like a
wicked virus.
Spacesuit face mask. Oh, the Disney store is totally out of business now. It's not even there anymore.
It was smart, right?
Well, it's interesting. It's not that old of a picture, but yet Times Square has changed so much since then.
Well, now you've got all the homeless encampments down on the left side, right? And all the urinals are on the right. So.
Haven't seen homeless encampments in Times Square yet. We did see some in Washington, D.C. yesterday, which is quite troubling. But it's definitely a wreck over there.
What I wanted to do was focus a little bit on the strange aspects of the lockdown that people tend to have forgotten.
Yeah. Zoom
masses
church
for the dead.
Oh.
Yeah, masses for the people who passed away with nobody in the church.
Yeah.
The next slide, we've got people doing yoga.
In the bubble. This is nuts.
Outdoors.
It's gotta be hot in there.
Outdoors in a bubble, right? Outdoors in a bubble.
So stupid.
Intelligent, right? This is going to protect you from the virus, right? If the virus is airborne, it's going to protect you from it. It's lunacy. But, what do I know? I'm not an epidemiologist. But the big thing that happened was that they put all the airplanes away.
Right.
All right. And they did this all over the world. All right. So the next slide, you'll see they parked planes everywhere. In England, in Greece, in Italy, in the United States, all over the world. The planes got parked. Qantas in Australia, they parked the planes. And when you look at the dates where all this stuff happened, it all kind of started on March the 11th. And March 11th of 2020, all hell breaks loose. And we're going to take a closer look at that tonight with our patrons. And we're going to see that Trump declaring this national emergency. We've got a bunch of video clips to watch. And so we're going to take a closer look at that. But on this day, 3 years ago tonight, if you go to the next slide, when Trump declares a national emergency in all 50 states for the first time in American history, there were 63 people dead in America.
That's amazing. Because, see, the hindsight, you remember all the hype on the news and everything. But, I mean, really, with 63 dead, it was all just basically that, hype on the news. Somebody who had no idea what the outcome would be would not know definitely with 63 people dead that this would turn into hundreds of thousands or millions of people dead. It's really interesting to look back.
And at this moment in Hong Kong, there's not 10 dead.
Right.
In Beijing, there's not 10 dead. And in Shanghai, there's not 10 dead. So that puts a point on it. In other words, if that's what's happening in China and there's 63 dead in America, We're going to declare a national emergency and deploy field hospitals in every city. What? Why? What? 63 people died so far? And that's what we're going to do? We're going to take a closer look at that. That seems a little bit like an overreaction to a respiratory infection that's killed 63 people, if you ask me. Now, I could be wrong, right? But we're going to take a closer look.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing that's odd is New York. Right. So this, no, you're good. Now look at New York. Go to the next one. Total coronavirus deaths in New York. By April the 2nd, 2 weeks later, New York has 4,000 people dead.
Yeah, that's a hell of a...
In 2 weeks, it goes from 60-something in the entire country to 4,000 people are dead in 2 weeks in New York? How the hell did Cuomo pull that off? In 2 weeks, 4,000 people died just in New York. There were 63 dead in the whole country just 2 weeks earlier, and they deployed all these resources. So what did New York do to screw the pooch? How do you end up with 4,000 dead 2 weeks later? If you go to the next slide, I know we're going to run out of time here in a second, but this is the dynamic. This was what was happening on this day 3 years ago. March 13th, Friday the 13th of March, 3 years ago tonight, Friday. And look at how COVID just shows up almost like an uninvited guest. Like it didn't really have time for people to start dying. It's like all of a sudden it's like, okay, COVID.
But this is showing us infections or deaths?
Deaths. These are people who died of COVID by week. And what you see is that the minute the president said, we're having a national emergency, the next week it goes boom. The next week it's twice that. The next week it, doubles again. And it goes to the moon in no time. Now, there are certain rules of mathematics that if I state them here, the video will get struck, or it has in the past. So I'm not going to mention those names of those people who there are schools named after in Queens, right? So in Queens, in New York, there are schools named after these guys. But I can't mention their name, or it's considered some sort of conspiracy thing. But when you see the onset of the deaths of COVID coming on that hard, that fast, without any kind of ramp,
right,
that violates certain rules of mathematics that I'll have to ask Matt Crawford exactly what rule of mathematics this violates. But it's supposed to not just go 0 to 100. It's not a Tesla plaid, right? It doesn't just go to 0 to 100. And similarly, on the next slide, what happened at the same exact time?
I mean, this was the stupidest.
So this is Hungary, and Hungary was one of the 3 worst hit countries as far as deaths per capita. More people died in Hungary per million. Top 3, Peru, Hungary, and Bulgaria are the top 3. And so, but you look at Hungary and you say, well, thank God influenza disappeared at the peak, or they really would have had a problem for the next 2 years since they had such a wicked case, wicked public health response. Thank God influenza disappeared just at the peak and it just went gone. That is just fabulous. That's a great thing to have happen. Now, the thing that I find odd, and this is where we carry the spiral of silence over from last week, is that all the big name epidemiologists and virologists don't take note of this. This is the WHO.
Are they
this
even
is
looking
the World
at it?
Health Organization. And it's like, because the guy in the hat and the glasses is pointing it out, it's poison. How does that make it kryptonite? The spiral of silence, the association. Oh my God.
Well, because I think they really, when you look at like Scott Jensen and other doctors of his stature who got on the news and things like that, people like that got absolutely crushed. And it's funny, before I met you, when I went to England to go to that Eric Braverman conference, there was a guy, I forget which, maybe Rwanda. There was a guy from Rwanda who was talking about this, how when one person sticks their head above the crowd to speak up and that head gets chopped, everybody sees that and they're very reluctant to do it again. But John, we're out of time right now. We're going to continue this conversation in less than 5 minutes with our sponsors on the exclusive segment. People can join us for that on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Also available on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth and on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com. We'll see everybody in just a few minutes